This is episode 29 of the Gauntlet Podcast. My name is Jason.
And I'm Rich.
I'm Steve.
And I'm Dan.
Awesome. Well, as always, we're going to start by discussing the games we've been playing recently. I am looking at the list, and Rich, you are still doing your playtest of the Dresden Files Fate Accelerated Edition. How's that going?
It's going pretty well. We realized that Dresden, the novels, that it's a investigation game, and there are no specific rules within Fate Accelerated for how you would do an investigation. So that's some feedback that we found might be good to pass along.
Seems like a good, something you might want to look into. Well, so last week, or not last, it was last week, I guess, we had mentioned that, we weren't really sold on Fate, or at least a couple of us weren't really sold on Fate, and we were going to see if your experience with Fate Accelerated was making you come around on that. How is that part of it going?
The Fate system Accelerated is still something I'm learning. We're actually switching GMs because one of the things we realized, we had a couple of layers to the playtest. We have the Dresden setting. We have that is set in New Orleans, which is the hometown of the person who kicked off our GMing, so he really wanted to get that right. And then it was the first time that several of us were playing the system. So we're actually going to switch off, and Lowell Francis from the Play on Target podcast is a member of the group. He's very experienced in Fate. It's one of his favorite games, and he's also very good with Fate Accelerated. So he's going to step behind the screen. And so I'm excited to see how that transitions, because I think it's going to take a couple of those layers that we're making some of the playtests a little bit more difficult for me to provide feedback, because some of it is like, yes, we could give feedback on a first-timer's experience with Fate Accelerated, but I'd really like to see how he handles it with a more advanced technique, and we really want to hit the specific mechanics that are part of the Dresden flavor of Fate Accelerated.
That's the thing about Fate, right? I mean, I have always in my opinion, the Fate games are incredibly difficult to run. They require a lot. I mean, it requires an experienced GM. That's just my belief. I mean, there are so many things that you have to keep track of, and there's so many moving mechanical parts in these games that I could see having a real like deeply seasoned Fate GM, how that might change things.
Yeah, I really think it will, because I've played Lowell's. I would call him kind of the super advanced GM for Fate, because he's actually got his own hack of Fate. I think that's what it takes, right? You learn Apocalypse World, and then all of a sudden you do a Kickstarter for Apocalypse World to show that you're really good with that engine. He's kind of like that with action cards, which is a super fun system he ran for me at Origins. So can't wait to see what Lowell has to do with it.
Yeah, I played like 2 years worth of Dresden Files Fate, and it'd be nice to... we had some trouble with there not really being, too much guidance on the investigation front. And it would be nice to see if they actually did sort of turn that around a little. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, they have all the ritual magic, and I played the Dresden, the original, the full-on Fate as well. And they have all this stuff for the magic system, the ritual magic, and all that was really great. But then, to me, Harry did a little bit of investigation, at least going around and talking to random people, and it was kind of fly by the seat of your pants, pick up a few aspects, and then throw a whammy if you can.
It's less of a focus of the later books than it is the earlier ones, but he's still a PI, right?
Right.
In our game, we were getting to the point where we went out and bought a cork board and started, sticking up little Post-it notes with names on them and trying to circle them with twine, and that's harder than it looks on TV. And some actual mechanics would be good.
So how are you doing investigation at this point? Are you doing is it just using the same approaches of regular Fate Accelerated? So is it like, I'm investigating sneakily, or I'm investigating quickly, etc.?
Yeah, we captured a necromancer and needed to interrogate him for why he decided to break into the Sunley Cemetery, number 1. And so, we were kind of not really sneaky. We were trying to be clever in ways that we would trick him in. Then one person ended up being forceful in their approach of trying to berate him to give forth his information.
I could see how that could work, I guess. It doesn't sound super intuitive, though, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see almost like in Burning Wheel how there are those little mini systems within Burning Wheel. Like, let's go out of Bloody Versus, let's drop into the fight system. Or, I'd love to see something like that. This, just a pocket version of an investigation. It's like they have some really cool rules for ritual magic. I want to see something like that for the investigation side.
Listeners, never leave Bloody Verses to go into the fight system. You will want to kill yourself. Just want to throw that out there. That's always a bad move.
Diaspora is a Fate-based, hard ish sci-fi game, and it has a number of really interesting subsystems for like social conflicts and I think investigations, things like that, where you basically sort of map it out using zones the same way you would a physical conflict.
Huh.
And it has its own neat little subsets of rules. So there are interesting, extant ways that you can handle that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's the strength of Fate in this kind of fractal aspect, and it's so easy to bolt on other things. But then there's also the intimidating part that it takes a little bit of a system mastery to understand the underpinnings and throw that stuff into it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, when I was reading through the 300-page Fate core book, I was definitely thinking, if only there were more systems to learn. That was...
Awesome. Let's move on to the next. Let's go to the next game. So Dungeon World. Rich and I, we have played Dungeon World on Saturday for Saturday morning cartoons. It's a revisit to Dungeon World with the same characters that we were running about a month or so ago. I really enjoyed it. I was pretty happy with it. I don't think there's a lot to say except that we had Doyle join us, which was awesome because I think Doyle's a great player. And so I'm happy to have him there. And I really enjoy these characters. It was fun to see them again. Yeah, it was Dungeon World. It was Dungeon World. It's Spelljammer, but ultimately led to a dungeon. It was great. What'd you think, Rich?
It was the most dungeoning that we've done in like 7 sessions of Dungeon World. And I mentioned it to a friend. It is called Dungeon World. It's
called Dungeon World. Yeah, it's in the name.
On the box, Rich. So, yeah.
And in fact, I'm always really interested by these people who play Dungeon World not in that way. Like, because truly, all of the moves point toward dungeon crawling, right? Pretty much every move that's on the basic, on the basic move sheet all has something to do with like fighting and adventuring. I just feel like that's where that game sings, and, but yeah, you're right though. It had been a few sessions since we had been like real deep in the dungeon, and we're going to be for the next 2 sessions. So I hope you enjoyed it because it's going to be a while before we get through that one, I suspect. But unless you guys just abandoned it completely, which is fine too.
Jason, do you feel like you're narrowing the gap between your face-to-face tabletop games and your online games?
That's a good question, actually. Yes, I do think so. I'm becoming more comfortable with it, that's for sure. I have noticed that I don't have the same anxieties like post-session, and so I think that has to be a sign that I'm feeling more comfortable with it, I guess. Before, when the sessions were over, I would just be like, oh my god, like, that just didn't feel like it normally does when I run a game. But I've increasingly that hasn't been the case. Particularly after our series of Monster Hearts. The Monster Hearts game was really great. I was very fortunate to have, players who really like kind of understood how the game was supposed to go and, contribute like in a really active way as far as like keeping the pace of the story going and stuff. And so I think that kind of helped me kind of get through that period, I guess, of like transition. But yeah, no, I definitely feel more comfortable with it for sure.
All right, good. Yeah, I was a little, I need to get in on some of the, Gauntlet Hangouts online stuff that's going on.
You do. I mean, I can't wait to see you on there. We have, between Doyle and Dan and myself, I think we've got like 20 some odd events up there just through November right now. So,
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I mean, there's a lot of gaming happening, and that is our, I'm going to use the word, you guys hate it when I say it. That is our raison d'etre, right? It is to play games. So, this podcast thing is just a little thing we do on the side, right? So. Awesome. Yeah, Dungeon World. It's great. I'm pleased as punch with how it's going so far. Lacuna Part 1. Was that you also, Steve, or was that just Dan?
No, that's Dan.
Okay, Dan, take it away.
We talked about what Lacuna is on the last episode, so yeah, it's Men in Black in Inception going into people's minds, essentially, and lobotomizing them. This is the first time I've ever played more than a one-shot of it, though, and it's kind of interesting to see how it's taking shape over like a long-term game, and you can sort of see the arc developing, and it makes a lot of things in the rules make sense, because a lot of the stuff in the rules is about how, as these people go into the dream world more and more, like they sort of get corrupted by it, and until the point where they just kind of disappear into it in a lot of cases, and so there's like rogue agents running around inside the city, and it kind of makes sense after you play it enough and start like getting a bunch of skills. So now, like, our characters are developing and actually getting much more competent in the city, and like it feels like we know what's going on in there. And in the case of my character in the regular world, I'm like a nameless man in black, but inside Blue City, I've got like a cover identity, and I've got like connections and all of this, and so it sort of like I can already feel the seeds being planted of like, well, I could totally see how my character would just disappear into Blue City forever and just like make a life in Blue City. So it's cool.
Yeah.
It's a very different vibe than like the one shot, jump in, solve a mystery, jump out. So
that's really cool to hear, actually, because that's the one thing I've wondered about Lacuna is, we've only ever done it as one shots, and it's like, I want to know what's around the corner,
Right.
Like what, I've still never played in a game where we see those spider things, right? That hasn't happened for me yet. So I very anxiously want to know like what they're all about, but.
Unfortunately, Jason, you don't have the clearance to know about the Spider-Man.
That's
I'm
true.
not ultraviolet yet.
No, sorry.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you wanted to say about it, Dan?
No, that's pretty much it. We've got one more session, so I'm interested to see how it kind of wraps up.
The next game on the list is Masks, which is also playtest, right, Rich?
It's in beta at this point. The Kickstarter is live, and anyone who backs the Kickstarter can download the beta rules, which has the playbooks, the basic moves, and then the GM moves, and that's all on Drive-Thru-RPG. I ran 2 different groups in Masks for the first time, stepped behind the screen, as it were. First one was with Brendan Conway's playtest group, which was exciting. I ran what I called the annual, where we had 3 generations. If you remember during the playtest episode, I said that, as the rules iterated, we ended up just making a whole new team of characters, and we kept them in a type of timeline. And so I created this time travel hopping combo crossover Secret Wars love letter type of bizarre just craziness. It was far too silly.
I'm sorry, how's love letter get in there?
It was a love letter to all of our characters from previous
Gotcha, never
generations.
mind.
Okay, cool. Well, so Masks, what else did you want to say about it?
Oh, I'm also running like a campaign level game with my Sunday group, and that's set in a high school, so that's been really fun. And I'm actually using an icon supplement called Hope Prep as the basis, kind of a setting book to save me a little bit of heavy lifting. That's been super fun. Watching new people interface with the rules with only that version of it instead of me where I've got, 6, 7 different iterations of it. That's been super fun. And we're doing that hangout on air, so it's live, and we have a few viewers that kind of come in and give us feedback. And so it's been really exciting. I like running Mask. I've got 2 sessions under my belt with that group.
Sounds good. I'll be interested to see the final product. I have a Supers PBTA game called Worlds in Peril, and so just by dint of that, like, it hurts to back Masks because I've got a Supers PBTA game I haven't played yet, but I may break down at some point. So
they're very different animals. I think Worlds in Peril is very kind of in the dungeon world mode. And Masks is just a different animal. Worlds in Peril is a lot broader in scope. Like, it really wants to emulate a lot of different comic types, whereas Masks really is that Young Avengers, Young Justice. So I think that they both scratch different itches.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
Hey, so Rich, let's say hypothetically I were running a game of Masks in 2 weeks. How do you prep for that? What's involved in actually setting up a session of Masks?
Well, the playbooks are going to dictate a lot of what's going to happen in the session, right?
Right.
So you would need to know an idea of what playbooks people are interested in. And then within each of those playbooks, there's actually a construction sequence of how the team got together. And each playbook has a different part of that story, so the mix and match can change it. Really, what you would need to prep is I would say come up with a really awesome supervillain and just start off with some crazy Titanic battle. And since it's a one shot, you can deal with the aftermath after the fact. And if you want to seed in a couple of like small moments in between the fight to give everybody a chance to shine, you can do that. But really just start off with a big fight. It even says it right in the playtest rules.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's about what I figured. So.
Yeah, you can't go wrong in any role-playing game, really, I think, by starting in the middle of the action, right? Like, that's like the best way to kick things off, I've always found. But well, the next game on the list is Monster of the Week. We've talked about that a fair amount. Who among all of us has been playing Monster of the Week this time? I have.
I will say I have not, and I think the rest of you have.
No.
Nope, not since the last recording. Okay. Steve, what about you?
Not for 2 or 3 years. No.
Okay,
right.
so it's just me. All right. Well, I don't have much more to report. I think I still like it more than you guys do.
I love it.
Do you?
Oh yeah. I've only played twice. I ran it once and played it once, but they were both like top 10 sessions of all time for me.
Oh, okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah. Well, so these guys, and by these guys, I mean Dan and Rich, they don't like the investigation part of the game. So,
Wait.
I'm not in love with the investigation
hey,
part
I'm
of the
dumb.
game.
I saw the word monster and I'm like, yeah, Monster Hearts. I love that game.
Oh.
I have never ever played Monster of the Week.
That explains it. I was like, what are you talking about? This doesn't sound like you at all. Okay, well, so I played Monster of the Week. I don't think the investigation's that bad. It's not great, but you only kind of have to spend about 25% of the session on the investigation. You can the rest of it can be kind of like driving toward the action, right? So, and I get a kick out of it. We were doing a 2-part mystery, and we wrapped up the second part of the mystery. It was pretty badass. One of our players is game designer Willow Palachek, and she's really good. Like the way she's playing her character, she's playing this cop, and she's just like plays her like just a real hard ass, and it's pretty awesome. So we're having a lot of fun with it. It's a good group. But yeah, Monster of the Week.
Did you guys happen to notice that we managed to accidentally play all 3 of Willow Palachek's Threeforged games?
I did notice that, yeah. And
Which ones were
she chimed in that episode when we were talking about those Threeforged games, and she said, "Oh, I'm glad you liked my game." She didn't say, she didn't mention that we'd played 3 of her games, right?
She did use the phrase, "At least one of those games was mine."
Oh, she did. Yeah. That was very, very sneaky of her.
Yeah.
Hers were Psychic Detective Agency timelines. And
Week of Sharks, right?
Yeah.
In a Week of Sharks, yeah. So, that was pretty cool. She's pretty awesome. I like her. Hey, play-by-post stuff. Rich, you got anything else new to report on that?
We just ended a session with the big 7-player character Apocalypse World, went through the HX switchovers. One person rolled over twice, which means that they got enough history with one person that it gets to reset and they get an experience point. There's actually a rules hack that I like to throw in on that. If you roll over HX with someone, then you get to ask them a question. You kind of give someone a reward, because when you roll over HX, that means the pluses that you get to help or hinder them, that goes away and it kind of resets. So give them a little bit of a fictional benefit. So looking forward to what questions will be asked between player characters.
Sweet. Hey, kind of a logistics question, Rich. Since last week's episode, I've had a few people ask me about getting play-by-post going through Gauntlet Hangouts, and I know you talked with me privately before about the difficulty of using G+'s system for anything long-term, and I'm sure that's correct. What forum do you guys use? What is your format, just so I can kind of point those people in the right direction?
I would say there are a couple of fora. If you want to use a little vanilla forum it's kind of bare bones, there's one that's been around for a long time. It's where I first started with Apocalypse World, called Snail's Pace. And we should probably link in the show notes, because it's kind of a long URL.
Will do.
And then my good buddy Adam Robichaux, he hosts a vanilla forum called NGP, which is pretty great because it's using a newer version of vanilla, so it's got some nice embedding features and is pretty. So we can link that.
Yeah, we'll link to it. I think what I'm going to end up having to do is we may have to set up some games on one of those fora just to see how it goes, and just promote it on Gauntlet pages, right? So I'm not sure how else to do it, because you're right, the G+ stuff is good to a certain point, but it starts to, we were doing Cheat Your Own Adventure play-by-post on G+, and it was just about at the end of its manageability, right? Like by the time we finished, like it was right up to the line of like, okay, I think this is about how many posts I want to scroll through, by the end. So,
it's not made for this. It's even the same thing whenever you're having a conversation with someone on one thread, and after like 15 posts on the exact same thread, it just becomes a chore.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that you could do that I've just recently been playing with is actually playing through Google Docs, not the spreadsheets, but the docs like a Word document.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty neat because you can do font color changes for whoever's talking. You can do headers or drop in pictures or links off to sounds or YouTube videos if you want. It's pretty cool. I would be willing to help somebody set something up like that.
Oh, that'd be badass. Yeah, that'd be rad. Yeah, and then you have like an artifact at the end too, right? So that's
exactly.
Yeah.
And if you have the right kind of link for people to actually comment, you get people come in and watch. They can't actually edit the document, but they could read along.
I like that. That's a great idea, actually. That's awesome. Cool. Anything else you want to say about your PvP games?
They're slow, but they're wonderful.
Okay, good. The next thing on the list is Urban Shadows. That was you, right, Steve?
Yeah, that was me. We are starting up a new face-to-face Urban Shadows game on Fridays at a newly opened Geek Life, run by some really awesome folks, actually. They were super nice.
Yeah.
I've only been out there the once, but I'll go back this Friday for, I'll finally get to play Monster of the Week.
Let us know how much you hate the investigation system when you're done.
All right. But it was our first session, and so there was a lot of what we had when we were playing, just before you left, Jason, with the first session, which is a lot of setup and then a little bit of playing. And, I really like my character so much that I got like really in character and involved in the only real scene I had, and forgot to like mention, I'm trying to trigger this move and this move, and we just like went through the scene without me, pretty much without me rolling. Urban Shadows, I'm looking forward to, because it was a lot of fun when we got to play.
Yeah, we did a couple sessions before I left Houston.
I'm just hoping to be able to, I guess, bring the characters together a little bit more, because the rules sort of encourage the characters to come together, but not necessarily to stay together. Not necessarily.
Yeah. And there's just so many characters. Like
Right,
the
right.
NPC relationship web and everything is so immense that, it could be hard to just cross paths with people,
Right. I think we're keeping that a little tighter this time around, but I might be mistaken, because Russ, co-host Russ who's running the game, might be going through and, adding further NPCs and whatnot.
If we had gotten to finish our game in Houston, we did not get to finish it just because my moving stuff kind of made it difficult for me to prep it in time, and so we just did some one-shots on those final Sundays. But if we had kept going, I was going to have, like, a scene where, like, just a bunch of NPCs died because I was like, I can't handle all these fucking NPCs anymore. Like, it was going to be, I'm trying to think of, like, what a good analogy is here. There was an old storyline in Marvel Comics from the 80s. I'm showing my age here. There was this assassin vigilante guy called Scourge, and he like wasted like 75 villains in like one issue of a Captain America comic book. And just because I think Marvel was trying to trim down the load, right? And I was having a moment like that. I was like, at the next crazy vampire rave, I'm totally burning that fucking building and having all these people die. It's I don't know if I don't know if the game is supposed to go like that, but then I'm thinking back on all the World of Darkness stuff, and those games are kind of like that. They have tons and tons of NPCs, and so
that's true. But the World of Darkness games, they always focused on one, type. You didn't have World of Darkness where it's our party is made of a werewolf and a vampire and a mortal and a ghost,
right?
And
right,
so
that's true.
So they had more excuse to stick together.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say though, I did like it. The 2 sessions I got to play of it, I was pretty happy with it. I thought I think the moves do a really good job of enforcing the style of play that the authors wanted out of it. And, so I was pretty happy with that. The only thing, I guess my only criticism of it is, my Excel sheet was exploding with NPCs like 2 sessions in. So,
it's a cool iteration of those rules, though.
Yeah, I thought so too. Well, and also, we've never said it on the podcast, but I'll say it now. The Urban Shadows book is so well written, and it is probably, to my mind, if you were going to pick up if you had no experience with Apocalypse World games at all, and you wanted to pick one of them up just to see what they're all about, I would recommend Urban Shadows. I think Urban Shadows teaches Apocalypse World the best. They've had years of like institutional knowledge when they were putting that book together to rely on. But as far as clarifying like some of the ambiguities in AW's like overall rule system, they did a beautiful job. It's really, really one of the best. Like the example I always use is, it's really difficult from Apocalypse World and Dungeon World, which is probably the next most popular, hack. It's really difficult to figure out how to handle PvP situations in those games, I think, or at least in Dungeon World it was really hard. And I love how in Urban Shadows they describe like mechanically how a PvP should go. And it really, really, like that's just one example of like, this is a question that I always had, and they've answered it so clearly in this book. So the book is filled with stuff like that. I think it's a really good book as far as showing what Apocalypse World style games are about. So.
And speaking of iterations of Apocalypse World, our next game is Soth.
Yes.
That has nothing to do with Apocalypse World.
Doesn't it?
No.
No.
What?
Nope.
Well, alrighty then. Segue
the
failed.
next game on the list is Soth.
I'm actually pretty sure that they refer to it as a Powered by the Apocalypse game.
I don't think so.
Actually,
You may be talking
Steve,
about
you're not
Undying.
completely off base. I read the book, and he does use some of the Apocalypse World like GM's principles in it.
Yeah.
So you're not totally off base, but no, in fact, it doesn't really play like one of those games at all. But
Hey, so how about this? Speaking of games that have tricky PvP rules, let's talk about
there we
Soth.
go. That's a good segue. That's a real good segue. So Soth, just to put that away real fast. It's to me, it's like it's an Apocalypse World hack in the way that Dream Askew is, right?
Or Murderous
like,
Ghosts.
It's like really, really far removed
Yeah.
from the core gameplay. So, while retaining some of the principles. Hey, Dan, set up Soth for us.
Is by Steve Hickey, and it is about cultists in small town America, and they have convinced themselves that it's a good idea to summon the elder god Soth and allow him to remake the world in his image. For whatever reason, they decided that's a good idea, but they all have, commitments. It's a very small town and everybody knows each other. And so they have commitments in town, and they have friends and neighbors and family members that they are trying to, sort of pass as normal people and, hide their crazy for as long as possible while they're behind the scenes murdering innocents and, just doing heinous things to bring about the return of Soth.
Well, so how'd you think it went?
After the game, I was having the same thoughts that you said you used to after your Dungeon World games, where I was obsessing over like everything I did wrong. I think a lot of that is just to do with the game itself is kind of tricky to run. There's a lot of ambiguity in the rules about the consequences of the character's actions. So the GM is supposed to kind of be keeping track. The characters can more or less do whatever they want, but the GM is keeping track of how much suspicion they raise. And so the GM has a pool of suspicion that is a currency that they can then use to put obstacles in their way. You use suspicion to empower NPCs to become investigators, and then the investigators can burn your suspicion to show up at inconvenient times and injure the cultists and escape and discover secrets and stuff like that. And so there's this balance between like the characters can basically do whatever they want, but you're supposed to always be mindful of like the clues they're leaving behind and use that to like come after them over and over with the NPCs. So go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, sorry. Go ahead.
So it's just like, it's a very tricky system to run because you have this menu of things that you can always spend your suspicion on. But like in a lot of cases, a scene would fly by and then I'd be like, oh, by the way, this totally should have just happened, right? Because I don't know what all of these, what the list is like, and I'm trying to run the game and like keep this in mind as well. And like, it's kind of tricky. It's a tricky sort of balancing act. And like, but I mean, that said, I'm really digging the story. So
I was a player in that game. I didn't run it, but I did read the rule book, however, and I had that exact same thought as I was reading it, and then also while we were playing it, which was, Jesus Christ, this puts a lot of the onus on the GM, like a tremendous amount. The players just get to kind of like freeform RP, right, and not think about much. The GM has so many balls to juggle, and keep in the air and pluck from the air as needed, right? It's an incredibly GM intensive game. Now, having said that, though, I think if you do internalize all that stuff and you kind of like really like come like down to the table with your, with your GMA game on for Soth, right? I'm not saying you didn't, Dan, but I just think that like it probably took you by surprise a little bit, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I could see where the game was going. Like I could totally get a sense of like, oh, I can see how this is supposed to go, right?
Oh, yeah,
like but yeah, I had fun though. I had a great time. I'm enjoying the story a lot. I'm loving my character. It's got this thing that you do where whenever your cultist is having a conversation with a non-cultist, kind of like privately, they have, so let me back up. Each cultist has a score called clarity. And the higher the clarity score is, the more like overt you have to slip up about Soth and
Yeah,
your plans for raising Soth, right?
So clarity clarity is a weirdly named stat, but it's like, because it's not really like clarity in the sense that we would think of it. It's clarity from the cultist perspective. So it's like you see Soth's vision more clearly.
Right.
So it's kind of the opposite
and that causes
of clarity.
you to show more,
Right.
right? Yeah. So anyway, what I was saying was I loved that part of it. Like, I loved getting in those conversations with your NPCs and like thinking about how I was going to just like randomly mention Soth, like accidentally. And, it was super fun to RP, and, I really, really dug it. I love, Soth is one of those games along the lines of, Fieldwork, actually, or Inspectors, or, some others that we've played, where it's like just normal Joes, but like with this layer of like supernatural, like kind of laid on top of it. And, I really loved it. I also like immediately, like from a read of the rules, I immediately grokked like the tone and the vibe of the game, which I think is commendable on the game's part. Like, and as evidence of that, I modeled my character after a character in the Coen Brothers movie Blood Simple, and then went back and looked at the movie references or inspirations for the game, and Blood Simple was the second one listed. Like,
nice.
I immediately kind of picked up on that, and I think that's because the text is so well written.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So we have one more session. I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Yeah. So another thing that I wanted to mention is like the cultists have a set of 4 rituals, and what's required for each ritual is very clearly spelled out. So it's something like, the second ritual, you start right after the first ritual. So you start with the final words of the victim from the first ritual, which is a really great touch.
It's such a good touch, yeah.
Like just the intro, you jump in right into like the aftermath of this sacrifice and getting rid of bodies and stuff. But then you have like one character has this book that lays out what all the rituals are. And so it's kind of up to them how much they share with the rest of them. But the rituals get increasingly, like, the requirements get kind of increasingly difficult. And so the second ritual is you have to complete it. You have to kill 2 people at the stroke of noon in a place where the public regularly gathers. And you have to make a sound loud enough to deafen nearby listeners. And so, which is like, so it gives them a lot of stuff to think about, like, how are we actually going to do that? And it, like, gives them things to strive for. But then the third ritual requires the cultists to murder one of them. So someone in the cult has to be killed for the third ritual. So, like, it points the characters at each other in a really interesting way. So I'm expecting the next session to be good, but I'm not so sure about how PvP is going to work. So I'm apprehensive. Like, story-wise, I can't wait, but mechanics-wise, I'm kind of freaked out. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe we'll tag Steve Hickey and see if he has any advice.
Yeah, I was planning on doing that. So
yeah. Cool, awesome.
Those ritual specifics, real quick. Is that randomly decided, or is that going to be the same for every game, or what?
Well, so those are the standard ones. There is support for changing out requirements, and he has lists of things that, like, maybe you could sub in this for this or something like that. So,
all right, that's cool.
Yeah,
cool, awesome. All right, well, let's go to the next segment. The next segment is Giving Me Life. Rich, what's giving you life this week?
All right, so this is a bit of a long story. No, I'm kidding. It's pretty short. I was sitting down this past weekend watching YouTube with my son. He's 9. And he was watching this basically Rabbit Hole the Show, where it's 101 things you didn't know about X, Y, or Z type thing. And he pulled up one on Gravity Falls. Now, Gravity Falls is a spectacular cartoon on Disney XD. Completely recommended. It's kooky and fun, and actually has legitimate mysteries. There's even a puzzle at the end of every episode, and lots of neat little things. And so when it was going through the 101 things you didn't know about Gravity Falls, as it got deeper and deeper into some of the mysteries and pointing out, oh, well, this tattoo is on his left arm, but it's on the right arm. I'm like, oh god, this is boring. And then all of a sudden, he said that a member of the voice cast of this cartoon voiced Strongbad. Now, my son had no idea who Strongbad was. Maybe you guys don't either. You guys ever heard of Strongbad?
I know what it is, but I don't know much about it.
Just barely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I am too.
Okay, so Homestar Runner is this Flash animated cartoon thing that was around from like 1996. And Strongbad is one of the characters, and he answers emails, legit emails from people, where he just mocks their poor spelling, and then there's usually a riff and something. At one point, the guy who designed the Flash animation created a little Flash game that you could play. There are others where you could download MP3s or ringtones, just this cutesy little thing. But there was a particular episode that I thought was fantastic where he talks about drawing a dragon and he creates Trogdor, the Burninator. So I said, son, we must watch Strong Bad right now. So we're on YouTube. We watch like 3 or 4 Strong Bad emails. We get to Trogdor, the Burninator, and the Strong Bad fans who are listening to me now are pumping their fists in excitement because Trogdor is amazing. And then 3 days later, this is giving me life. I show you evidence that my son is cool. He drew me Trogdor, the Burninator. And I'm showing this. It's great for an audio podcast, but by gosh.
It's really good radio.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome. That gave me some life.
Cool. Awesome. I'll go next. So the thing giving me life this week is a large coffee table sized book called The World of Ice and Fire. This was written by George R.R. Martin and a couple of other people who were helping him out, whose names I don't know. And
Elio Garcia and Linda something Swedish sounding.
I'm impressed you know that. Wow. Anyway, it's amazing. So what it is it's basically this it's this book that has a ton of art, but also a lot of text. And the text covers the history of Westeros and really the whole world of that Song of Ice and Fire takes place in, from the time of from very ancient times when the land was just covered by elves and dragons or elves and giants, and then to the time of the first men, the coming of the Andals, the Targaryen kings, and then right up until the point of the books. So right where the books start, that's where it ends. And it's really great. It's a really good really, really good deep dive on the history of this world if you're into that. But the thing I really love about it, the reason why it's giving me life, is it's written from the point of view of a maester of the Citadel.
Right.
And it's pretty clear he's not a reliable narrator. He's not an entirely reliable narrator. So he says things that are outright contradicted by what we know from the books and TV show already, right? And he also clearly has an ideological slant to everything he's saying. And so you're getting the history of the world, but through this ideological filter. And also he is clearly there's a propagandistic aspect to it.
Yeah.
Whenever it relates to people who are currently in power in the world. And so on the one hand, it's this really, really interesting, historical overview, but on the other hand, it's on the edges, it's unreliable. There's a lot that you're oh, that may not be true. Or, there are lots of little asides where it's oh, there are rumors of this being a thing, but that's ridiculous, right? When it's pretty obvious that, yeah, that's totally probably what happened, right? So, I don't know, I kind of dig the narrative voice of the book as well. They could have just gone for a dry overview of the history, but instead they chose to tell it through this very, very conflicted narrator, and I really like it. It's pretty awesome. The World of Ice and Fire, super badass.
I really love that aspect of it as well. But I found that in the fandom, it's a thing that a lot of people hate about it because they just wanted finally we can get some objective facts about this, about these books we've been reading. Curse you, George R.R. Martin. That's not what this is. But yeah, I got that, that was one of the things where it's pre-order as soon as it was announced and read through that last year. But you find, I think it was in those books where, sometimes the books are so large that sometimes they just sort of, screw with you a little bit. George R.R. Martin has been known to insert, joke names into his.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Like the Tullys,
right? So there are three
the
Tullys mentioned.
after Sesame Street characters,
right? There's a Kermit, an Elmo, and a Grover, I think.
Right, there's a Grover, and Tully himself too, right? Yeah, or Tully, the name Tully. Yeah.
Oh, also, never mind. My favorite thing about this is that there's a dedication page at the beginning or back of the book, one or the other, probably beginning, and it's written by, theoretically written by the maester that compiled the book, right? And it's made out to King Robert, and then you can see where that was sort of artfully removed as much as possible,
right?
And then quickly replaced with a subsequent ruler, yeah,
right.
And
yeah,
maybe
awesome.
even again, I don't want to get spoilery.
Yeah, no, it's great. Listeners should check that out. If you're into those books at all, you should check it out. It's really awesome. It's a really, really, this could have been just like a cash-in thing, but it's not. It's really, really deftly handled and
it's gorgeous.
A really good read. Yeah, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, the art's crazy.
Awesome.
Do you think this is him avoiding writing the next book, but still paying, still making payments on his giant yacht or whatever it is that he's doing?
Always.
Okay.
Awesome. Hey, Steve, what's giving you life?
What is giving me life this week is CheapCon. My friends Steve and Lisa in Austin every year host a house con, I guess you'd call it, a small convention at their place, and it's called CheapCon because you don't pay anything, you don't have to do anything. But it's been responsible for a ridiculous amount of fun every time I've gone, and so I make it a point to journey out to Austin whenever it comes up again. And this year, they're splitting it up into, well, it's the same as last year, but they're splitting it up into 2 weeks. So the first week will all be board games, card games, that sort of thing. Then the second week will be role-playing games, and I'm gonna make it to both. And it's a little less structured with the board games. We always end up playing, some cool thing or other. I'm hoping to get to play like Catacombs, Letters from Whitechapel. There's too many things on my plate for me to focus on just one. But I'm especially looking forward to the RPG weekend, where we will have, I'll be facilitating games of The Final Girl and Society of Dreamers. Society of Dreamers, 7 o'clock, Halloween, darkened room, candles. Should be fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
we're doing that on Hangouts as well, listeners. Just so
right, you're doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, if I'm not mistaken. We get to play, I think, Dread and Microscope and all sorts of fun things. I think Brian Ingard's playtesting some new, what's it called? Oh crap. Not Revolution, what's it called? We played it at Jason's going away party. The, whatever, Avalon.
Oh, the Resistance.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, there we go. It's like the Resistance inspired type of thing. I don't know how heavily. All I have is the blurb on the sign up sheet.
I'm happy he was able to escape from Steve Jackson's ziggurat. That's awesome.
He made last year too, actually. And I think I'll be able to play an Apocalypse World Mad Max centric hack from Jason Morningstar that I Googled and could find nothing on.
Oh, yeah, I think I saw pictures of that in his G Plus feed a few months ago.
Yeah, I remember him. He was posting about that when he was doing it.
Yeah, that would be cool. I love Apocalypse World, of course, but the Psychic Maelstrom type stuff always seemed, not super Mad Max, and so it'd be cool to play something a little closer to the source material.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Hey, Rich, the Steve he mentions is organizing the group. That's our Steven, right, on Saturday Morning Cartoons?
Yeah.
Steve?
Yeah.
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 So, little connection there. Pretty cool. I wish I could go. Gosh, it was timed really poorly for me because
right.
I was considering staying in Houston through October just for it. But Rich was like, no, the fuck you won't. My Rich, not present Rich.
What's Dan's
cool,
excuse?
What weekend is that?
It's Halloween weekend and the weekend before.
I am running 10 candles for Halloween at my house.
Oh, what is that?
It hasn't come out yet. I think it should be arriving in inboxes in a day or two, but you play with the light of 10 tea candles.
Oh,
and
cool.
As things get more and more bleak, you extinguish candles, and then when all the candles are gone, all your characters die.
Okay, cool.
You also burn shit. So, as you burn your traits, you burn the index card.
Oh, wow.
You literally burn it at your table.
Right.
That sounds safe.
Yeah, well, that's why we're playing at my house instead of, at Geek Life or something.
Right,
Where it's hey, let's play with open flames in your place of business. So.
Do it at Jack's during Zydeco night. That'd be great.
Right.
A bunch of hicks and fire. That sounds like a terrible idea. Awesome. Cool. We'll put a link to CheapCon because I think by the time this airs, there'll still be time for Austin listeners to go check it out. So
I don't know if it's if there's a public link or anything.
Oh, okay. All right, well, I don't know. I'll tag Steven. So.
Yeah.
Cool. Dan, what's giving you life, or is anything giving you life?
Hey, so I had something that was totally giving me life, but then the Threeforged results came out and knocked all of that out of my head. So I've been living for Threeforged since the results came out. So let's talk about Threeforged.
I thought just when you think Threeforged, when you've escaped it, it just pulls you back in. It just
that's a much more
right back in.
That's a much more pessimistic way of looking at it. I was looking at it like a cornucopia that just keeps on giving the goodness of Threeforged, but I guess I could see it as, a horrible creature that just keeps sucking you into its like maw.
Into its maw.
Yeah.
Well, so what are we talking about?
Well, so one thing, my number one choice, game one.
Yeah,
So-
right.
Yeah,
that was-
pretty
I was
happy
really
about that.
surprised.
I was
That
super
was
stoked that Fieldwork won. It was such a good game.
Yeah.
And I was extra stoked to find out that Josh Fox and Grant Howitt were authors on that, along with the third gentleman whose name I forget.
Shreyas Sampat, I think.
Yes, that's right. But Josh and Grant had been on the show recently, so there was a lot of like synchronicity going on with the show and Threeforged, and I was really excited about it.
Synchronicity, not collusion.
Yes, they are two different things.
Yeah, no, not collusion. No, definitely not. Definitely was not a conspiracy. But no, I was pretty cool. I was happy to see Fieldwork win. So.
Fieldwork I was happy about. When I was looking through the results and like kind of going through and seeing like who the people I recognized were, right, and like what games they did, I discovered that my number one and number two choices were written by Grant Howitt and Vincent Baker. So I was like, all right, great. Well, I guess I confirmed that I like these two designers is like my takeaway.
Yeah. Well, they wrote the stage 3 versions of the games, right?
Which I feel
Yeah,
like that's
yes.
the one that, you kind of get the final seal of approval on, right? And so, I mean, I feel like, at least on my entry, that's the one that I felt like had my voice the most in the final product.
Yeah. I just while we're reflecting on Threeforged for a minute, I mean, I think we're going to have an episode about it with Robert Bull at some point, but just real briefly, I have to say one of the things I've really, really loved about the competition is, the chance to meet lots of people online in the indie game space that I'd never met before. So,
Yeah.
I'm having fun just kind of making those connections. And I think that was part
Well,
of
that will
Paul's
make
goal.
Paul Sega
So,
very happy to hear, so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, and now that the veil of anonymity is lifted, I can say that in one of the reviews for my game, my Stage 3, I was told that I created the most inane and uninspired RPG mechanic.
Insipid was the word used,
yes.
I think.
Insipid and uninspired RPG mechanic in the history of games. So I feel like on my first time out, I've already like surpassed all of the great games of our past in shittiness. So I am kind of proud of that. Like, and it kind of tempered the blow because plenty of other people were like, hey, I really like this mechanic. So that was nice. But like the one that I'm holding on to and actually kind of love is the one that said that I was a complete hack and piece of shit. So I kind of love it.
That was the thing about this contest. A lot of people were proceeding apace with their commentary as if anonymity was forever,
Right.
Or as if
everyone was like Steve Jackson or someone who had a team of people making these games, right? And it wasn't just like a dude making this game who had probably never designed a game before. But
yeah.
It's interesting to look as well, compare like final products that I'm familiar with earlier, first and second stage iterations. I discovered that a friend of mine wrote the first stage of It Is Forbidden, which we came away thinking was, sort of bordering on not being a role playing game in some way. At least it's like a good setup for another game or something like that, right? And so I'm like, ooh, that could be awkward. What do I say to Mark? So I checked the first stage of that game, and I was reading through the first few paragraphs, and I'm like, I must have clicked on the wrong link. Let's try again. Nope, it was this one. It bears the first and second stage are definitely different versions of the same thing. And then the third stage bears, I want to say, about a 5% relationship to the first and second stages. Clearly just took some nugget of inspiration and ran with it, as a few designers were wont to do.
I felt bad because we kind of we were so, I don't want to say harsh, but like the Clinic was clearly the one game we played that just we felt was just a disaster, right? And at least as far as the playability. And I felt really bad because Robert Bull was part of that, and he's been he's a friend. So it was, but he's the kind of guy who takes that kind of thing in stride, I think.
Right.
So. But, yeah. Cool. Is there anything else you want to say about Threeforged? I think we're going to have an episode about this.
Yeah,
in the
no,
future.
I just wanted to like get a little bit out while it was fresh, so.
All right. Sounds good. Cool. All right. Well, let's go to the next segment. The idea for the topic today is you're going to always run into people who maybe play role-playing games, like, say, more traditional role-playing games, like Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder, but who have not played story games or more narrative-focused games. And I don't know about you guys, but I always kind of I have, like, a running, like, kind of catalog or Rolodex of games in my mind of, okay, whenever I encounter these people, and I encounter them a lot, which game am I going to throw out there to be like their introduction to story games? It's always The Final Girl, but it's almost always, it is 90% of the time The Final Girl, or Fiasco, the other 10%. But let's say theoretically, I wanted to be a little bit more thoughtful about which games I throw out there, and so Rich kind of came up with this topic, and the idea, if I'm capsulating it here correctly, Rich, if I'm not, tell me, is a lot of story games stand for a certain proposition, or they have like a sort of like built-in best practice that has been carried over to other games, or that is just like good practice for like all story games. And so we wanted to basically suggest games that we think are terrific for introducing the form to new players, and what that game helps teach them. Because we've all been taught those things, right? And so it's kind of just passing the buck forward a little bit, right? So is that good? Is that a good summary of the topic?
Oh, Jason, that's great. I think of it as these are the kind of games that I would recommend to someone who wants to build up that toolbox to be able to tackle other story games. So yeah, I think that's very succinct the way.
I like that. That's good. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And just to clarify, are we thinking like these are like more traditional role players who are dipping their toes in story games, or are we talking about, or is it or people who have never played a role playing game ever?
My approach has generally been that you would need these games as a toolbox to kind of unbreak your habits or help to show you a different way to look at it.
So more traditional role players. Got it. That's how I read that. I think for players who have never ever played a role playing game before, I think that's The Final Girl, right? I've always said that like for me personally, The Final Girl is such a good game for people like that who've never played a role playing game, because it has, kind of a party game feel to it. And so, it goes down really smooth. So yeah, I hear you on that, Rich. I think that's the right perspective on this. Well, let's just get started. Rich, it was your topic, so why don't you go first? What's your game?
Thanks, Jason. For me, it would be Primetime Adventures, the second edition or the third edition, which was recently kickstarted successfully. Primetime Adventures, I'm pretty sure you guys have talked about it in the past, is a game where you're emulating a television
We've never
show.
played it.
You've never played it.
I've
All right,
Dan and I have not, yeah.
Primetime Adventures is a story game where you're emulating a television show. Ideally, you're emulating a series of television shows, with each game session being a different episode of that television series. You can play it as a pilot, as a one-shot at a convention, but it really sings specifically for a particular mechanic called screen presence if you play between 5 to 9 sessions in a mini-series capacity. The things that Primetime Adventures taught me when I first played it is that you have a character creation without stats, which can feel a little loose, right? When I came from the Dungeons & Dragons kind of mindset, I knew how to define my character through statistics that were number-based. Primetime Adventures is different because you take those PCs, you boil them down to their issues, their impulses, and they'll have maybe some connections with people and traits, and those are very broad. And so it's simultaneously a little worrisome because you have to think out of that box, but it's also very freeing, similar to like Fiasco, where I've seen more traditional players who get that narrative ability to describe whether they succeed or fail and how it happens. And it can be very exciting to people to make those characters, especially when you've got the angle of a television show, right? Everybody knows TV, so it's an easier medium specifically to facilitate the conversation of like, okay, well, I'm going to play so-and-so type of character because I know this actor, I know this particular TV show, and I'll emulate that. And so I think it helps it go down smooth if you know, we're all doing a TV show here, and this TV show is so-and-so rating, so it's going to be on, I've even played Primetime Adventures games where we say, this is going to be on the CW network, which is a totally different thing from saying, this is going to be on NBC, or this is an HBO series, you know?
Yeah, it really is, yeah.
I think once you know that you're aiming for the feel of a television show, TV show episode structure is watch a certain amount of TV, so ingrained that you just accidentally find everybody, aiming for wrapping things up at a certain time and aiming for, still leaving lingering issues that'll carry over into future episodes and that sort of thing. Just sort of falls into place nicely.
Yeah, Steve, you're not a story game poser like Dan and I, right? You've played Primetime Adventures, correct?
Oh wait, I've played it twice. Yes. I've just barely played it. But one of those sessions was my best game session of all time, really. Just
I keep hearing how great it is,
Yeah.
and I know it's one of those games we're supposed to play, and we keep putting it on the calendar. It's been on the calendar like 19 times.
That's true.
But it always falls off, so sadly. It's always my fault, too, because whenever the day comes, I'm like, oh, guys, I just don't think we're going to be able to pull this off, and then we don't do it. So
I'll tell you this right now, Jason, Dan, I will run Primetime Adventures for you guys sometime.
I will definitely play with you.
I will play.
Actually, the reason why it always falls off is because when we were doing our face-to-face stuff in Houston, because our groups were so fluid, like we had to be like really flexible as far as like who shows up from week to week and which game we play. And I always got the impression from PTA that's not easy to do. And like you have to have the same people every week for like 5 to 9 weeks. And so that's the reason why it was never a great fit for us. But I'm anxious to try it.
It would not have worked in that particular. The drop-in, drop-out would not work for Primetime Adventures.
Yeah, and it's kind of vital for the Gauntlet, that drop-in, drop-out aspect. And so that's why it was always tough for us to do. So.
The only way I could see it working, and this is a note for Dan and Steve, you could potentially be, if you had good documentation, the role of John is played by, and then you just have whatever player showed up, they have to play that character.
Oh, that's interesting.
That could be cool. Actually, I could kind of see that. Yeah. I've actually done that. I've actually done multi-session games where, we've had like a core group of characters going for a while and one person drops out and somebody else wants to try it for a week. And I just say, we're just going to play that guy's character. It's worked okay. So,
And there's also I don't know if somebody's actually posted it on their blog or not, but I think Ryan Macklin wrote up a sort of vague and very general set of guidelines and rules for running it as a one-shot that he called Blockbuster Adventures. And that was the one-shot I played that ended up in an amazing session. And it's just, condensing things and ensuring that it introduces a main character, basically, who has a higher screen presence than the others. And you just, the other characters just sort of know going in that they're aiming for one character story.
Right.
But it ends up working really well.
And so that's modeling a movie rather than
Right,
a TV
exactly,
show.
yeah.
cool. Yeah. Primetime Adventures. Is there anything else you want to say about it, Rich?
As soon as you play with fan mail, you'll say, I'm going to have fan mail in every game, which everybody says, and it doesn't work.
Right.
It's made for this game.
Hey, we're playing Golden Sky Story soon, which
Golden Sky
has
Stories
fan
has a
mail.
great. They do fan mail great. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. Well, so Steve, what's your game?
My game, surprise, is Apocalypse World. I talk about Apocalypse World and derivatives a lot, and sorry, but I do love it.
Are you enjoying that fruit that you just picked that was low hanging just now
Yes.
from the tree? Yes. Okay.
I didn't. If this wasn't even low hanging fruit, I went through a list of the games I've played, narrowed it down to the ones I thought taught interesting things, and aimed for the one I thought, or where I came up with the best, the most valuable lesson I think that I've picked up from these games. So it was low hanging fruit, but I did a lot of
You
scientific.
discarded all of the
Right,
high-hanging
exactly.
fruit first, right?
Well, so what's the proposition that that it's teaching us here?
So Apocalypse World and most of its derivatives, I think, are very good at teaching you how best to find what the Forge folks would call story now, or what Apocalypse World phrases as play to find out what happens. And that's where you don't have a preset story as the GM or the MC. You don't have hoops for the players and the PCs to jump through. You set up some dominoes, and then you have the PCs go at them and let them fall. You go in with broad strokes opposition, and the Apocalypse World sets it up with fronts. And I think Dungeon World has threats, right? Or maybe I'm getting those confused. But it's things operating in the background. It's the plans for the bad guys and the way they would react. And it's a couple of things you write down, and you just sort of, so long as you have a very vague idea of what any given opponent or antagonist might want, then you can react appropriately in the moment when players start inevitably messing with them. And the rule structure helps out a lot with this, but it's definitely still a skill that you can transfer to other games even without having the, written down the specific principles and agendas.
Right.
And the specific, I respond whenever you fail a roll, that sort of thing. But I think it teaches this very well, and I think probably at least 50% of the way it teaches it is just showing you how brilliantly and how wonderfully it works in play. How much story and how much satisfying story you can get out of a session going in with very little.
The best session prep advice I have received in the last, 5 to 10 years has been from Vincent Baker Games, right? I mean, Dogs in the Vineyard and then later Apocalypse World, there's something about the way he, just the way you prep those games that's transferable to basically any game that you would prep. You can transfer that style of prep to Dungeons and Dragons if you wanted to, and play it, a little bit more like that. I just want to throw that in there. He's a master
I totally agree. Yeah.
Of concise prep.
There's a thing about Apocalypse World that I found incredibly enlightening from the player standpoint, and that was the idea of manipulating another player character by offering them experience.
I love that.
By offering them experience point. That is real motivation right there. The manipulation, you do what I want, or you act under fire. The touchstone has a particular move as well, where, if you're doing a thing that I like after I've told you my vision for the future, I can give you an experience point. There's something about that, sharing the experience, that economy, that is really interesting, and it kind of flipped my lid when I first played it. So I played Apocalypse World before I ran it, and that was one of those, I went from, I can only do what's on this list, to, wait, I can give him XP to do what I want? Interesting.
Yeah, I do like the introduction of the carrot versus the stick in PvP interactions. It's a very elegant way to handle things.
Awesome. Yeah, there are so many things in Apocalypse World, right? I mean, geez, it's really, really just radically and magnificently changed kind of how I play role-playing games. I don't know about you guys, but...
Yeah, I think failing forward also is a big thing. That I think that was my first real introduction to the concept of failing forward, and that failure doesn't mean you try again in 30 minutes when your turn comes back up in the initiative order. So
I actually got that from Burning Wheel, but yeah, I hear you though on that. Yeah, for sure.
Be a fan of the players.
Right.
To explicitly state that.
Yeah.
It is a very influential and important game that taught us all lots and lots of things.
See, I was trying to be concise and just bring up one thing.
And
so
the podcast will go on for 3 hours.
Right.
If
we didn't have to go on and on about Apocalypse World.
Okay, so listeners, you don't know this, but there was episode 2 of the podcast. We attempted to do an Apocalypse World episode where we talked about Apocalypse World. It was 19 hours of conversation. Dan heroically managed to whittle it down to about 2 hours, and even then it was this strange cobbled together Frankenstein.
Right. It was 2 hours of disjointed thoughts that were coherent enough to sort of string together into a podcast. Early days.
It was a fascinating conversation. I wish you guys could have heard it, but you would have probably never listened to another episode of The Gauntlet again.
Well, it's episode 2. They could hear it right now.
Oh, no, I mean, the
full uncut version.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the uncut version.
No, I think that's been flushed down the memory hole, so I don't think that exists anymore.
Okay, cool. Well, let's go to the next thing. Dan, what is your game and what's the proposition that it stands for?
So my game is Archipelago 3, and so this is by Matisse Holter, and I think Jason Morningstar had something to do with the third, from bringing it from Archipelago 2 to Archipelago 3.
I think that's right, yeah.
But, so it's a GM-less game that tells a very concise, very tight story focused on a set of characters. I was kind of in the same camp that Steve was with Apocalypse World, where there are so many things that I could say about this game because playing it was sort of the scales fell off of my eyes, and I was like, this is how GM-less games should work. One of the things that I think is most interesting is that in the beginning, all of the other players give you possible destinies for your character. And so you pick the one you like, and the game ends whenever your character achieves that destiny. What that does is that it gives you something to play toward. I feel like in a lot of GM-less games, and this has been my experience in a lot of cases with even things like Fiasco, you sort of get past the setup, and then no one knows exactly how to start. And like once it gets going, it's fine. But like it has this problem of like building up the initial steam, especially with a lot of new players. What Archipelago does is it teaches you to sort of have a destination in mind. And maybe if you don't even know how you're going to get there, that's fine. But you're taking like every scene is taking a step down the path that will lead there eventually. Yeah. So I think that's great. And it's kind of giving you a way to like set scenes like with confidence and make scenes that are going somewhere.
I agree 100% on that. Archipelago 3 is probably one of my, in my top 5 games of all time. Like I really love it. And I had actually, the thing I always think about when I think of Archipelago 3 is the table rituals, like the sort of ritual phrases that kind of dictate player behavior and sort of like shared narrative responsibility. That's what I always like. That's what I took away from Archipelago was like, oh man, this is a master class on like how to behave at the table, right?
Yeah.
And how to not get butt hurt when someone doesn't like your idea, right? Like it's really, really good for that. I had never thought about it in the way that you've just described it, Dan, which is, because every character has like a predetermined destiny, it actually gives you the space to role play and frame scenes with confidence. That's pretty good. Yeah, I like that a lot. That's pretty awesome. Have you ever played, Steve, Archipelago?
No. I really wish I'd had the opportunity, but I haven't had the chance yet.
You did? Did you do Love in the Time of?
Nope.
Seed
I haven't played any
Save?
version
No.
of it. No.
Okay. What about you, Rich? Have you played that one?
I set up to play a play-by-post, and then we had the mystery of the white page, where you just stare at it, trying to figure out how to start off a scene that you know how it's going to end.
So what I'm describing as a strength is where you where it fell down for you. So, okay.
It didn't teach me that well enough in a play-by-post environment, that's all.
I think I have to say, I think that the magic and the charm of Archipelago 3 would be lost in play-by-post, because so much of what makes that game really beautiful is going back to the ritual phrases. The ritual phrases ensure that like everyone's telling a coherent story. Like you're all it's GM-less, but we have these tools at our disposal that allow us to politely override people and make sure that the story that comes out on the other end makes sense. Like we're getting to these final conclusions in the right way, in a way that is that's really coherent. And some of the very best stories we've told probably in my gaming in the recent years have been from Archipelago, right? In terms of just like their discipline, and they're just quite cohesive. And some of the magic of the game is in that that social sort of control and the ritual phrases that kind of dictate people's like table behavior. I think that would get lost in translation.
Yeah, it would be tricky because kind of the initial phase of Archipelago is sort of making everyone's mental model of the world you're playing in align. And so to do that, you have to be able to interrupt, and it gives you the tools to interrupt. But it also, like, because other people have the ability to interrupt you and to veto things you say, it also gives you a lot more permission to be free about what you're suggesting. So, like, it takes the pressure off you, what you're suggesting, because it doesn't have to be canon if other people don't like it. And then it also, like, allows you to make sure that no one else is putting anything in that you're just not going to be able to deal with. The whole initial phase of that game is sort of making everyone's mental model of the world align in a way that lets you tell a story that is super tight and, like, makes sense in the world that you all have in your head. So, yeah, without the ability to interrupt very easily in a play-by-post setting, I don't think it would work very well.
Yeah, Archipelago 3 is awesome though. Listeners should definitely check that out. It is, in my opinion, it's highly underrated. I put it up there with, like, to me, it's right up there with Fiasco and Apocalypse World in terms of like its importance in this vector of the hobby. And I would love to see it get more, I don't know, like playtime from people.
And listeners should definitely check it out because there's a free version.
Yes, that's true.
It is free.
Yeah.
Period.
I'm just saying you can order from Bully Pulpit the
cards. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You get the little cards. Cool. Awesome. Well, I guess I'm next then, huh?
Yep.
So the game I've chosen is Inspectors, which is by Jared Sorensen. I'll give a quick overview of it. It's essentially Ghostbusters, the role-playing game. Players are running an inspectors franchise. They go on jobs and they earn money and they try to build up their franchise. The reason why I chose it is a couple of things, but they're related. Keeping in mind the perspective that we were going with this topic of role players who maybe are accustomed to a more traditional game, like say Dungeons and Dragons. I chose Inspectors because that's a game that is still has a GM, but manages to put a lot of the creative narrative onus on the players. And so you get kind of the best of both worlds, which makes it a really terrific story game teaching game, because I'm still the GM and I still have fiat and I'm still calling balls and fouls, but the mechanics force you as the players to actually decide what the story's about, right? The GM does not. The GM just kind of is there just to arbitrate like conflicts and to say when he thinks that you're suffering stress or harm. The rest of the story is entirely driven by the players, and so to my mind, it's a good like transition game. It's a good bridge game between fully GM-less games like say Fiasco and games that are more traditionally GM driven. And so just so players or listeners understand what I'm getting at as far as like the players having a lot of narrative responsibility in the game, one of the first things you do is figure out what the mystery is about, like what the monster is that you're hunting. And the way you do it is there's a table that gives you like some very, very like simple descriptors, like such and such found some purple slime in her basement, right? And then it's on the players to offer theories about what they think it is. And then the first person to offer a theory, they roll their investigation dice. And if they succeed, they're correct. And that's what that's what the monster is. And the whole game is driven that way. It's all about the players like saying what they think is happening or informing like the fiction, and the dice kind of like confirming yes or no, right? I like that aspect of it. It's you know, it's still a little like, it still has that sort of like GM safety thing kind of like in the back, but as far as like being a transition game, I really dig it. So
I was kind of surprised to see that you put this on here, because I feel like I've had mixed success with Inspectors. I've been in 2 games of it. One of them was one of the best games. One of them was one of the worst games, because like as players, we really fucked things up. The mystery we made was stupid. It was like just ungodly awful. And like I guess we weren't necessarily taking our responsibility seriously enough to make the story good and not make it just straight dumb.
Well, so that was my fault. I remember which game you're talking about. It was in a fairly gonzo game. It went like like a factor of 10 more gonzo somehow. And I think that was kind of my fault. I probably really should have put the brakes on you guys and said, hey, that's kind of stupid. Why don't we like dial it back just a little bit and do this other thing instead?
I'm starting to see the value of those more polite archipelago phrases.
Yes, yeah. I think when the GM is not abdicating his responsibility like I was on that Friday night in that hot-ass office after a long week of work, I think the game really does kind of because I played it a lot more than you, Dan.
Right.
And my experience has always been the GM kind of just gets to sit back and watch the players kind of run with the story and kind of make the story they want to make. So, yeah, I know. Inspectors, shared narrative control with players.
Yeah, well, I would say that even that awful game, I mean, it was instructive. It taught me that we should be more serious about our responsibilities as players. But, yeah.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I'll take that.
I had one game of Inspectors that didn't go well, and afterwards we did a little bit of post-mortem. We found that there wasn't a whole lot of listening at the table. That one person very early on predetermined what they thought the mystery was. And this is the monster. This is the one who did it, right? It was kind of a sleepaway camp type of deal. And another player said, no, it's this totally other thing. And so every time that one of them would add clues, they were continually playing towards their hand. And then at the end, it just didn't make sense. And just like you said, Dan, you totally hit the nail on the head. It was instructive. It taught us about listening at the table. It taught us about working together. And it was helpful.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the fact of the matter is, no matter how good a rule set is, a game will break down if players aren't playing in the spirit of the game.
Well, sure.
You know, yeah. I mean, it's just the way it is. I mean, I hear this all the time. It's like, oh, well, I played Cthulhu Dark once and it was a disaster because everyone just wanted to, they were just like, you know, constantly attacking the player who's the spotlight character to make them fail. And I'm thinking, and my reaction is, well, you weren't playing in the spirit of the game. That's not the spirit of that game, right? Yeah. Like I hear that a lot. And so I think that's always a danger in any game. I think the best games the rules help you mitigate that. But in inspectors in particular, I think there is a bit of like, there's a bit of GM responsibility. The GM is still the GM, right? And so it's probably on the GM to kind of step in there at some point and say, hey, maybe we should just, I flubbed that on that one for sure, but whatever. It was still fun. I had a good time.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Steve, do you want to talk about Microscope?
Sure. Theoretically should be quick. I also wanted to mention another game that I think teaches something fairly instructive. Microscope is a game about, listeners are almost certainly familiar with it, but it's a game about constructing a series. It's basically the story, the very broad strokes story across a certain defined timeline could be of an empire or of the rise and fall of a person, kingdom, empire, something like that. And Microscope is, it's strange in that it's a very fundamentally collaborative game, but on any given person's turn, like it's my turn, I get to write a thing on a note card, you can't say shit about it, and then I set it down in a certain place on the table. I add it to the timeline. And then subsequently on your turn, you get to write down a thing on your note card, I can't say shit about it, and then you write it down on in the timeline. You place it at a certain spot. And so you're building on things that have come before, you're building on contributions from the other people, but without even having the ability to do the archipelago thing of, I haven't played, I don't remember what the phrases are, but, politely, can we try a different way? Or
try it a different way.
Really, well, yeah. And, so it forces you to, you can't even necessarily have things in mind too much, because your idea of the things that are happening could change radically between turn 1 and turn 2 for you, because of what people add to the timeline. But you have to, eventually, you can sort of try and play it safe and just add to your own things, but that's kind of lame. Again, playing within the spirit of the game. But you have to, at a certain point, build on other people's contributions that you really didn't have anything to do with, aside from them having built on yours.
Right.
So it's a very good instructional tool of teaching you how to collaborate with the other players and incorporate their suggestions cooperatively and productively.
It teaches you to play nice with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking that sounds like a kindergarten teacher describing the virtues of like a big box of Legos. Right?
Yeah, I have to say that's the hardest part of Microscope for me. That aspect of Microscope is so hard for me because you are literally, per the rules of the game, not allowed to say shit. You aren't allowed to say shit when somebody writes something down on the tape on the thing, and no matter, even if that thing is totally stupid and is going to ruin the coherency of our story, but whatever, I can't say anything. No,
theoretically, at least the game mitigates that by the pre-game yes/no list of please no game-breaking horseshit and yes awesome things.
No, it is good. It's very instructive. I continue to learn that lesson every time we play it. So, awesome. Let's go to the next segment. Our next segment is community feedback. So back in September, I put on the G Plus a post that was a question that was intentionally provocative. I don't think I even believe it. I just wanted to throw it out there to spur discussion. And that statement it went like the following. When did the act of actually playing games stop being important in the indie game space? It was inspired somewhat by the fact that you just see lots and lots of like talk about games, but not tons and tons of discussion about play. I'm led to believe that I'm just looking in the wrong places, and maybe I am, but I know people play games. I'm kind of just, like I said, I'm kind of being provocative, but we got some good feedback. And so a lot of people had the basic like, well, there are lots of games and not enough time, right? Well, I get that. Sure. That's just a life situation. You can't do much about that. But other people had some interesting things to say about it that I wanted to kind of share that were a little bit more, I don't know, that really got to kind of like a lot about like process in terms of like, indie game design and stuff like that. So listener Ryan said a cool thing. He said, I think a lot of it comes from the fact that story games tend to be narrower. They have a single, very specific theme or narrative structure or genre or emotional reaction that they want to explore. When you design like this, you're obviously narrowing your pool of potential players. I guess they require more buy-in from a group. I can sell a setting to a playgroup much more easily than I can sell, this game will make you sad, right, or whatever. And I think a result of this is people with a bunch of games they want to play, but a group that's reluctant to actually change and do it. So there's the next best thing, which is lonely fun, reading, analyzing, and often designing. And I don't necessarily think that actual play is always what a game needs. A lot of really cool and interesting games don't require any play and exist more as thought experiments. I don't think they're any less valuable for that. What do you guys think about that?
I don't agree that there should be games that aren't made to be played. I think that's kind of weird.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. That was also kind of a provocative thing to say, in my opinion. Like this idea that there are some games that are just meant to exercise the designer's demons, and once they've done that, their work is done. You know, it's kind of an interesting thing.
There's this game that Vincent Baker wrote and just put up on his blog called The Rock of Tahamaat or something like that. And it was basically presented as I don't know about thought experiment, but it was just showing you how different methods of resolution can happen within a scene. It was mostly just a thought experiment with some scene slapped onto it, or with some setting slapped onto it. I still really, really want to play. It sounds awesome. So I don't know that I think I'm with Rich on this one. I don't know if I'd say shouldn't, but I'm a little more skeptical of a game that's presented as just a thought experiment. Like I kind of want to engage it on its level and try and play it.
Okay, so my counterpoint to that would be the Willow Palachek's game, Sunshine Boulevard, which is the game we kind of mentioned it, I think, offhand in an episode a while back, but it's a game.
Not by name, though.
It is a game where two of the players are in on it, and one of them is not. One of the players thinks it's a romantic comedy, and yet the other two players, the GM and one other player, know it's actually a game about a murderer. And they will brutally murder the third player in character at the end of the game. I don't know that that's a game I ever want to play, but like the fact that it exists is like endlessly fascinating, and I love it. But I don't know that I would ever even play it. So I think there could be a statement to say.
So you're supporting listener Ryan's position.
Yeah. I think there is value in games that, like, even if I know I'm never going to play that, like the odds of me ever playing that are so slim to none. But like I appreciate it as a thing that's out there, and like thinking about that game made me think a lot about like game design in general. But yeah, I mean, it's not something I probably ever want to play.
Yeah, I think there's kind of picking up on that. I don't ever want to play Cartel, right? Like I don't ever want to play that. And a lot of people do. It's clearly not a game that was, designed to not be played. Yeah. But I don't want to because I find the setting distasteful. And so, I can kind of, but I also kind of appreciate it in another way too. Like I do appreciate what Mark Diaz-Truman did with PBTA, and he clearly has an understanding of like the cultural ins and outs of it. But for me, like it's one of those things where it's like, I'm glad it exists, but I don't think it's for me. But I don't know if that's quite the exact same thing you were saying about Sunshine Boulevard, but because Sunshine Boulevard, I'm not sure anyone's meant to play that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. I really want to, though. I actually want to.
I'll be honest, I do too, but I don't know when I would.
Yeah, I don't see how it's going to happen. I was talking to Willow about that. I was like, I love your game. I don't know when it's going to happen. Yeah. Like, I just don't know when that takes place.
Yeah, it sounds really intriguing, but I'd have to, whoever the odd man out person was playing that game, I'd have to be very close friends with. Yeah. And they'd have to be willing to forgive me for the thing I'm going to do to them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I take listener Ryan's broader point, for sure, which is, it's much easier to sell a player on a setting, or especially if it's like a sci-fi or fantasy thing, right, than it is to say, hey, I've got this weird little game about, I've got this weird little game where you play cultists in small town America, right? Like that might be the kind of thing that's a tougher sell. And so that could be why some games don't get played. Yeah. But we've actually talked about that, I feel like, before. Maybe, didn't we? I feel like we've had a topic like that.
Probably.
Anyway.
Maybe. I can appreciate that point while still realizing I'm the person for whom this game will make you sad is a huge selling point. That sounds great.
Oh yeah,
I agree. Yeah, I'm kind of there with you for sure. We intentionally make games sad, like Cheat Your Own Adventure. That's not supposed to be sad at all, but we play it sad. So yeah,
I actually think that Ryan's point wasn't exactly an answer to the question posed. It's talking about why games don't get played, not why people don't talk about playing games.
Yeah, well, so the question was the way I put the question was, when did the act of actually playing games stop being as important? And the conversation in the thread became about the indie design community being very focused on design and analysis rather than actually like experience of play at the table. That's actually a pretty decent segue to one of the other comments that was said, which was, listener David said, recent games are better at telling people how to play that specific game, or at least in theory they are. So instead of analyzing 10 different play sessions, people analyze a single piece of design and infer the consequent play style that should occur at the table. I'm not saying that this is done right every time, nor that everyone has the same skills in doing that, but it seems to be the trend. It's probably also a consequence of the number of games out there. Playing at the table every single game that got us interested would require an amount of time that none of us don't have. That's the main argument people were making. He said it could also be a phase. The community seems to have moved away from theory to analysis of the actual play, and then from the analysis to design. Game design is a response to the actual play. Designers are trying to either reinforce or change certain play styles or issues they've seen at the table. Once the fuel of analysis runs out, people will have to go back and play to study and come up with something new and better. That's an interesting. I don't know if I agree, but I thought it was an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I think it's probably a little broad to explain everything, but it's like the Forge seems to be, whenever I visited, very focused on theory. And then there was sort of an explosion like 6 or 7 or 8 years ago about people talking about, oh my God, why are we not playing games? And then it's sort of become a cyclical thing where it's turned into more and better game design. And I think that's a pretty reasonable point. It's and we should probably expect it to sort of circle back around again, even to an extent.
Yeah. I'm curious where we talked about this with Paul Sega, which was like, what is Forge 2.0? Is there Forge 2.0? Right? And it was an interesting sort of thought experiment of like, is there like just this idea that like there are phases that the community goes through. I'm not sure I buy into it, and it's definitely like a macro level thing, right? Yeah. But it's definitely an interesting thought. So. Anybody else have any thoughts on this? I think I'm pretty good on community feedback.
I'm good.
Oh, well, just one thought that I had. I think there's a certain cachet in talking about being a game designer that isn't present if you're, quote unquote, just a game player.
Oh, yeah. I never feel more more blue collar or working class than when I'm on the gauntlet talking about playing games. I mean, it's true. I'm not even kidding. I feel like we are like of a different caste or something sometimes, in the gauntlet. Like I feel like we are the blue collar consumers of things, in the games.
I've always viewed you as our Jeff Foxworthy.
Yes, I know. You might be a member of the gauntlet if, I don't know. I'm teasing. I don't mean that, but like, but I see what you're saying, Rich. Like, there's definitely like people want to be designers. They don't want to be players, right? So.
Yeah, it's weird too. And what's funny is that in our game, in all role-playing games, from OSR all the way to custom moves from Apocalypse World, we're all designing the game as we play. You have to make a rules decision at the table. So we're all game designers, but there's a certain cachet in talking about this game. I'm making a whole game that does this one thing that I like.
Yeah.
From so-and-so.
Yeah. It's pretty addictive, I have to say. I mean, I've only designed 3 games at this point. Well, I guess if you count Threeforged, I guess it's like 5 now or something, but I want to do it more, like I want to try my hand at it again, but it's kind of, it's very much like kind of, I'm still more interested in playing them, I think, than I am actually in doing the work of designing my game that 5 people are going to play, So, yeah. Anyway, Dan, you're smiling like you have something to say.
Oh, do I? Am I? How can you even see my face? The pop screen's in front of my face. You're just lying.
I can tell you're
just baiting me.
You look anxious to say something, Dan.
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Well, that was community feedback. That was we actually got more discussion out of that than I thought we were going to. Awesome. And that's our podcast. So listeners, if you'd like to get in touch with us, we are on Google+. Our community is called The Gauntlet. You should go there and search for Google+ communities for The Gauntlet and find us. We also have a community, a separate community where we run our online games called Gauntlet Hangouts. You should go check us out there as well. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks so much for joining us, Steve.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Dan.
Anytime.
Thank you.
All right, everybody have a good week.
The truck door comes in and